Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 27 of the Journey Running Podcast, where the goal is to help you run farther, feel smarter, and develop character through trail and ultra running. I am your host, registered dietitian, coach, and ultra runner, Stefan Schuster. I've got kind of a lot of show notes for this week, actually. Today, we will be recording an episode on my race report of the Leadville 100. This is a race report, but I'm also going to be trying my best to throw out lots of tips and tricks to succeed at the Leadville 100 mile endurance run. Let's get into some of the show notes for the week, though. So today was the Leadville 100 lottery, which is why I was inspired to record this episode today. Recording and releasing this episode hopefully in the same day. It might come out tomorrow on the 9th. But anyways, I did not get into the lottery this year, but, congrats to everyone who did. Hopefully this episode will be a great assistance to anyone who is preparing for either this year's edition or for future editions of the Leadville 100. I should also note that in addition to this podcast episode, the Leadville 100 Substack race report that I completed is now live. You can find that either on the journeyruncoaching.com website. You can find the blog on the website, or you can check out my Substack as well if you go find just Journey Running on Substack. I will also be putting up a YouTube video. I'll be honest, I've produced I make YouTube videos for most of my 100-mile races, but this one I don't think it was my best video, which is why I've been, procrastinating it. I didn't really get any footage, or I got very little footage from miles like 80 to 100 just because I had a tough time after the Outward Bound aid station running Leadville this year. But I guess I've just been procrastinating it because the ending wasn't too great. Not as good as my usual ones. Anyways, what else do we have to discuss? For anyone who is interested in my 2026 running journey, I released an episode a few episodes ago on the Rocky Mountain Slam. As of today, it will not include the Leadville 100, but disappointing, but that's all right. Currently, I am in the Scout Mountain 100 in Idaho, which is, I think that's like June 5th. And then I'm also in the Crazy Mountain 100 in Montana, which is like July 25th. Got really lucky getting into Crazy Mountain. The race, I woke up at like 5:45 that morning, signed up at 6 a.m. The race was sold out at 6:03. My timestamp was 6:02, and I know someone, and I got into the race, but I know someone whose timestamp for signing up was 6:03 a.m., and he was like number 40 on the wait list, so that was kind of crazy. I'm also waiting on the High Lonesome lottery, which is in about a week, and I was in the Bear lottery, but Bear I did not get into. If you run 3 events of the Rocky Mountain Slam, you can still get yourself into the Bear 100. So I am hopeful, but we'll see what the High Lonesome lottery says next week. High Lonesome does take place a week before Crazy Mountain, so I think it would be super cool to basically run High Lonesome and a week later Crazy Mountain. That'd be a hell of a 200-mile week. Basically like building your own 200-miler. But anyways, I just thought I'd throw in an update on that since I haven't talked about it since that episode. Next up it is also early January as I record this on Thursday, January 8th. The last episode that I produced was with TJ Harms Sinkyu, and we talked a lot about trail work in that episode. So I would just like to use this as an opportunity to remind people to make sure that you are including volunteer hours and at races and trail work in your schedule too. Highly, highly, highly recommend. You don't even need to volunteer at a trail race. You can volunteer at your local 5K or marathon or even your local church if that's your thing. It doesn't really matter to me. I just think that, if you run trail races as a participant and you expect other people to, drive out to trailheads in the middle of nowhere, stay up overnight, cook you ramen and bacon at like 2 o'clock in the morning and help you achieve your dreams, then I think it's important that, you pay it forward by helping other people achieve their dreams too. But I also understand that not everyone has maybe the access to like a car, for example, to get to the middle of nowhere to volunteer. So that's why there are other options to give back than just at trail races. And I highly recommend that you do. I think it's good for yourself and the community. And frankly, I just think that if you expect other people to make your dreams become a reality, then you should do the same. It's just the right thing to do. Lastly, you will notice, or at least consistent listeners will notice, that there is a new logo for the Journey Running Podcast. It is very similar to the old one. If you noticed, I did put up on Instagram, I had my original Journey Running logo. I updated that, just slightly tweaked it, added a tree and mountain in the background. I wanted it to be more of like a trail running coaching logo for Journey Running as opposed to the first one, which was just a guy running. So I thought that, adding a tree, a mountain in the background made it look a little bit more trail-esque per se. But because I updated that logo, I needed to update the podcast logo, of course. So, I asked Journey Running athlete Truly Murphy to help me out, and she did. Truly, along with ChatGPT, what a great combination. The two of them were very helpful in coming up with what the new logo is. It's very similar to the old one. It's like the same mountain background with the new logo on front, and then I put some nice little headphones on the logo. You'll see it if when you're scrolling through Spotify or Apple or whatever. So that's most of the show notes I got. Before we get started, I would also like to remind people that, Journey Running, it is more than just a podcast. It is my running and nutrition coaching business. So if you or anyone you know is looking for a coach to work with or a registered dietitian, you can reach out to me on my website, journeyruncoaching.com, or directly via email at journeyrunningsllc@gmail.com. Also, it would really mean the world to me if you could take a moment to rate, subscribe, and review the show. I would really appreciate it. Even doing things like leaving comments on podcast episodes on platforms like Spotify are very helpful. Those actions, I know they might seem trivial to some, but a 5-star review and any sort of engagement that you provide the show does go a long way in helping more eyes and ears get on the Journey Running podcast, and I really do appreciate it as I try to grow the podcast and my business. But that is everything that I have for you all. I think that was like the most show notes that I've started an episode out with so far. But anyways, thank you for sticking along with me. Let's get into the Leadville 100 race report that I've got for y'all. Before we even get into the race, I think that one topic that is important for athletes who are participating in the Leadville 100 is, where are you going to stay before, you get to when you get to Leadville for race weekend? That was a question that I had to ask myself because Leadville, I live in Boulder, only 2 hours away from Leadville, but everything in Leadville is just a little bit more expensive on race weekend for the 100. So, they have, 700-ish starters for the 100-mile that weekend, plus crews and pacers, media, etc. So the town is quite busy that weekend. And one thing I noticed was that a lot of the Airbnbs and hostels and stuff in the area, they require you to stay like a minimum of like 3 nights or something like that. And that makes it fairly expensive. And also the prices are just jacked up. So one of the recommendations that I have for people is I think it is February. Yeah. So like 6 months before the race, what I recommend doing, because this is what I did, was if you go on the the USFS website or something, there's a whole bunch of campsites in the area, and you can reserve a campsite 6 months in advance from, when you're planning something. I personally recommend camping before any sort of trail race. I know Leadville takes place in an actual town, but there's a lot of trail races that take place in the middle of nowhere, and a lot of people car camp or just pitch a tent the night before. I recommend doing that for Leadville. You can get a campsite pretty easily by reserving one on one of those government websites. Alternatively, you can find dispersed camping. There's a lot of dispersed camping, for example, by the Mount Elbert and the Mount Massive trailheads. But I know the night before a race, nobody really wants to worry about having to find your dispersed campsite. Also, that can be a little stressful. That's why I think reserving one is a good idea. On the flip side of reserving, you might end up with some loud neighbors. That's unlikely because a lot of people in town that weekend are there for the race. They're also going to be going to bed early, but something to keep in mind. I guess I was unfortunate and ended up with some loud neighbors who arrived at 1 a.m. So I just put in some earplugs, and that's how I went to sleep that night. But I don't really think you're going to sleep much more in an Airbnb versus in your car. The race starts at 4 a.m. anyway, so you're going to have to wake up at 2. With that said, I thought that was a nice little tidbit to add to people's day because, sometimes less is more, and spending $1,000 for 3 days of an Airbnb, to me personally, is just not really worth it when you're not going to sleep that much better in a car. Or yeah, you're not going to sleep better in a hotel than in a car. Anyways, let's get right into the start of the race, though, with that said. So the starting line to the Leadville 100, it is quite hectic and chaotic, I would say. There are over 700 athletes who pile into that starting quarrel. The lines for the porta potties are significantly long. So make sure that you get there early, make sure that you do your business early, and make sure that you are wearing enough layers, but not too much, of course, because a lot of the first 38 miles up to the point where you get to Twin Lakes is pretty flat. So you really don't need like a whole lot of gear. I started in like just a t-shirt, or I was wearing like a button-up rabbit shirt, and used some arm sleeves and had some gloves, and I had a waist belt. That's really all I started with. I used a handheld water bottle, plus I had a second water bottle in my waist belt that I was wearing for the race. But yeah, there's a few important questions that you need to ask yourself like right off the bat when you arrive to the Leadville 100 and you start the race. And the first is, because the field is so large, you have to ask yourself, where do you want to line up? There are a lot of people who are there who are going to start out really fast. Some of the people who start out really fast, they're justified. People like David Roach, who go out at a 6-minute pace for a 100-mile race. He is justifiably going at that pace, but there are a lot of people that are not justifiably going at that pace. The Leadville 100, one of the reasons it's so hard to get into in the first place is because it's so well known. And part of that is because of its history. It's one of the oldest ultramarathons, 100-mile ultramarathons, starting in, I think the first edition of the race was 1983. Don't quote me on that, but if it's not 1983, I'm like a year off. It's one of the oldest 100-milers, but it is also very well known amongst like the general public because of books like Born to Run. It is also very well known because of a lot of influencers who run the race, and just a lot of people know of it. And there's also no requirements in the lottery process. So if you want to apply, you can. You don't have to run like a marathon or a 50-miler or a 100K like a lot of other mountain 100s require. So because of that, the barriers to entry are very low, and it's very well known. And because of that, there's a lot of people at the beginning of this race who will start out very quickly. And also keep in mind, the first like 3 miles of the event are on a very, very wide road that trends downhill. It's not super steep of a grade downhill, but it is downhill. So people start off fairly quick there. One thing that might be helpful for people to know is like my strategy. I was going for a sub 24-hour time. I think I started with a goal of shooting for 22 hours, and I finished in 23:45. So I'm going to say my times at certain aid stations throughout the duration of this podcast episode. That way, if you are interested in building a pace chart for yourself, this information might be useful for you if you're trying to go under 24 hours. And for reference, sub 25 hours is how you get the big buckle at Leadville. But I started the race at like a 7:30 pace, and my first 4 miles were 7:32, 7:58, 8:13, and then 8:32. So I started out quick and slowly eased into what I was planning on before the race, of a steady 9 to 10 minute pace miles while going around Turquoise Lake there. So for me, that worked really well. I was really surprised that, I thought going out of that pace was, for me, that was a very comfortable pace. For everyone listening, I would not recommend starting at 7:30 unless you know that and you're confident in your ability to do that and still feel good at mile like 70, right? But if you know that you can do that from experience, then you should, I would recommend starting out faster than slower at Leadville. And the reason is because after the first like 4 or 5 miles, once you hit like the Turquoise Lake section, the trail becomes single track and passing people becomes a lot harder. And because there's like very little barrier to entry to apply to Leadville, and a lot of people who don't have a lot of trail experience are in the lottery and get in and then are running the race, a lot of those people will start out pretty quickly. And then the second they hit something technical, they kind of slow down. I would say it is better to start slow and instead of too fast because, you can't win your 100-miler. And when I say win, I don't mean like win the actual race. I mean achieve your goals for the day. You can't win or achieve your goals for the day in one section. Like, you're not going to do that in the first 12 miles, but you can ruin your day in the first 12 miles, right? So I think that's an important differentiation to make and think about as you prepare your plan, your pace chart for that first 12 miles of the event. It's much better to get stuck behind some folks who are too slow in a conga line than and be 5, 10, 15 minutes slower on that first section than you wanted to be, than go out too fast and blow up 50 miles into the race. That's definitely not what you want. But I was pretty surprised that by the time I was at mile 4 or 5, I was running alone. And yeah, I was alone by mile 4, which was very surprising given the size of the field. When I started running around Turquoise Lake, there was a few people who did end up catching up to me, and it was kind of fun. I just chatted with a bunch of folks. There was one guy named Matt. If you're listening, Matt, we met at Stories in 2024, and it was funny because he was running behind me. We couldn't see each other's faces, and we just recognized from the conversation that we had met a year and a half prior, which was hilarious. So, it's kind of cool that despite the really big field size, you are going to see hopefully some friends that you have on the course with you out there. So I'd say really that outside of a few conversations I had while running around Turquoise Lake there, most of my run around the lake was pretty uneventful, which is a good thing, I think, that early on in a 100-miler. Yeah, so it's pretty dark. Keep in mind at that point in the day still, it was about 5 a.m. All you can really see at that point is the silhouette of the mountains in the distance, and you can tell that the lake is pretty close to you, but there's not a whole lot of views that you're missing out on while you're running with your headlamp at night there. I would say just stay focused on the trail ahead of you. Make sure that you're being careful with your foot placement. I would not describe Turquoise Lake as incredibly technical, but I did run across an individual around mile 10 who did sadly sprain his ankle, and I think that did end his race only 10 miles into the event that day, which was very unfortunate. I do want to, kind of just sidetrack the conversation for a minute, because these things do happen in an ultra, and I think it's important that folks who are listening to this, you understand what you really need to do when something goes wrong, whether that is spraining an ankle or taking a wrong turn or forgetting what piece of gear, a certain piece of gear at an aid station, for example, or maybe you didn't eat enough and you're bonking on the trail. Sometimes when things go wrong, we have the tendency, or our body's natural responses, to produce adrenaline. Taking a wrong turn off course is a really great example of this, where if you take a wrong turn off course and the second you realize it, your adrenaline spikes and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? But when your adrenaline spikes, it becomes really easy to make a foolish decision, which is why I bring this, kind of side conversation up for a brief moment, is because, you want to make sure that you don't make foolish decisions when things do go wrong. For example, when something starts hurting, maybe you do sprain an ankle, your first thought might be, let me take my shoe off and take a look. But that could be a really bad decision in the long term, right? Because what if you sprain your ankle, you take your shoe off, and all of a sudden the swelling after you take your shoe off doesn't let you put your shoe back on? That could be very problematic, right? Same thing if you take a wrong turn on a course. If you go off course, you take a wrong turn, your adrenaline spikes, and then you try to get back on course in a timely manner. That might mean you're sprinting back on course and you expend a lot of energy doing so. And then you end up in a worse position than if you had, for example, just taken some deep breaths, taken out your phone or your watch or whatever you're using as your GPS device, made sure that you got back on course, back to the correct spot, and didn't rush your way back there. Make sure you kept fueling, hydrating while you get back to that point, and then you continue on with your day going the right way, right? Make sure that the course markers are there and you move on. Really, the important thing when you're running ultras is to try your best to remain calm. Don't let your body's natural fight or flight response dictate your response. So take some deep breaths, make, I would say, thoughtful decisions, and move on with your day from there. Try your best not to, let that fight or flight response control you and your responses, though. So, yeah, that's why I bring up that individual. Just be careful while you're running around the lake or just at night in general. Nobody wants to sprain their ankle at mile 10 into 100. But, yeah, it does happen. It's ultra running. It's an extreme sport, whether we like to say that publicly frequently or not. But yeah. Anyways, I got into the turquoise, I was going to call it the turquoise lake aid station, the May Queen aid station in about an hour and 58 minutes. It was just about light out, or had just gotten light out a few, maybe like a mile before I got to the aid station, which was cool. My goal time to get into May Queen was an hour and 55 minutes, and I got there in 1:58, so I was very pleased. One thing that I'll bring up about Leadville, and this is pertinent for any 100-mile race, so when you're going into Leadville or any ultra for that matter where you care about your time, your placement, you're really trying to do your best and perform well, is to make sure that your aid station transitions are as quick as possible. So one of the things, I'll just talk about my nutrition plan for a moment and how I was able to do that, but I highly recommend that if you're running Leadville, you take the time to make sure that your aid station transitions are quick, because if you look at the aid station chart for Leadville, I believe there are 11 fully stocked aid stations plus there's the Mount Albert water station, but we'll say there's, I think, 11 fully stocked aid stations, right? And you can see your crew at a bunch of those, right? So think about it this way. If you spend just a mere 5 minutes at each of those aid stations, that comes out to 55 minutes of your race. That's a significant amount of time. So I would very much urge anyone who's running this event, especially with a 30-hour time limit. Most hundreds have a 36-hour cutoff, but Leadville's a 30, right? So you want to make sure that you're taking advantage of all the time that you have given to you. You don't want to spend it stopped at aid stations. So one of the ways I did that was I followed my same fueling plan that I used for Western States. It worked really well for me. It might sound funny if this is your first time hearing about it, but I used maple syrup in a soft flask for most of my calories for both Western States and Leadville. I just run with 250 milliliter soft flasks filled with syrup, and every time I saw my crew on course, I just had them swap out bottles, right? It's about 800 calories of syrup in each bottle. It's a lot cheaper than gels also, which is one reason why I do it, and it also tastes better, I think. But yeah, I did that, so I didn't even really need to get food at any of the aid stations. The other thing I did was I know that Tailwind works really well for me. Disclaimer, I did take a sweat test. If you really want to dial in your electrolyte intake, I highly recommend doing a sweat test yourself. I would definitely recommend taking a look into that if, you just want to dial things in and have those numbers be very precise in terms of how many milligrams of sodium you're having per liter of water, right? So for me, I use the Tailwind, the double packets, which have basically 2 scoops of Tailwind in there. So that's equivalent to 620 milligrams of sodium and 200 calories. So, before I'm getting into an aid station like May Queen, for example, I'm like walking into the aid station while I have a packet of Tailwind in my hand that I'm pouring into my bottle. That way, when I get to the aid station, the only thing that I need to do is fill up both my bottles with water. Since I already have my electrolytes in one of those bottles, I already have my to-go food, which is my maple syrup. I guess I also did have like a Cliff Bar with me, but that's just, I had my food on me that I wanted on the go already is the point. And grab a few chips, a few M&Ms, and be on my merry way. Saves a lot of time. I think my aid station transitions were, for the most part, like 2 minutes long, maybe not even. Especially that first one. All I had to do was get water, throw out a wrapper, and leave, basically. So I highly recommend taking the time to do that, and also like visualize what that's going to look like before the race even starts. So once you leave the May Queen aid station at mile 12 and a half there, you have a very short patch of road running before you end up on the Colorado Trail for a very quick 2 or 3 mile segment. That 2 or 3 miles, it is, I would say, tough just because it does trend uphill. It's not super steep, but it is very rocky and rooty and pretty technical compared to the rest of the Leadville course. I remember even hiking this section when I was backpacking the Colorado Trail. The Colorado Trail runs from Denver to Durango across the state of Colorado, and and there's a bunch of parts of the Colorado Trail that are on the Leadville course. But, even when I was backpacking it, not trying to do it as quickly as I possibly could, I remember thinking, wow, this is a really technical section. You got to be careful with your foot placement, and it will slow you down if you're trying to, run it fairly quickly too. So just something to be aware of. Although that section will slow you down, the second that you pop out of the woods there, you end up on a dirt road that is maybe like 300 to 500 feet per mile of like gain, and that'll take you up and over Sugarloaf Pass there. And that's good to know because I think a strong sub 24 hour runner, and for reference, I do know the Big Buckle is sub 25 hours, but I'd like to think of it as like sub 24 and then sub 30. Maybe that's just the Western states in me. I don't know. But I do think like a strong runner is going to be able to run that road. And so that does bring up another great training tip, which is to make sure that you're including a variety of grades in your training plan. A lot of people think of Leadville and they look at the elevation chart and they see Hope Pass and they think to themselves, I need to practice my ability to run and hike up really, really 1,000-foot per mile steep inclines, and that is very important for Hope Pass, right? Of course, that is the hardest part of the race, but you don't want to neglect the fact that there are some shorter climbs that you can perform really well on, like that first climb up Sugarloaf Pass there, where you want to make sure that you're coming into that with having trained on similar gradients, right? So that you feel good and strong while you're running up that. For me personally, I felt pretty good for most of, I would say in the first 80 miles, I felt like mostly good, but there was like a short time from mile like 13 to 16 on that segment where I just had some stomach bloating and I was just a little gassy. One thing I've noticed, if you fuel high carb, not that I would consider myself like a high carb athlete by any means, I probably was doing like 300 calories per hour or so. I think the elites that are doing like 500 calories an hour, that I would consider high carb diet. But you hear people like David Roach, who's the most prominent person on who's been pushing that, and he talks very frequently about like pooping in the woods or burping or farting, stuff like that. I think it's just how your digestive system processes having to metabolize a lot of carbohydrate while you're running an endurance event like this. So I had a little gas while I was running up. It slowed me down. I was kind of pissed off, if I'm being honest. I'm trying my best to keep this race report, but also it's like obviously a mix of race report and story, but also tips and tricks for the race. So anyways, yeah, that was how like my experience went while I was going up it. I wasn't feeling my best. I was kind of annoyed that like 15 miles in I was struggling a little bit, but it passed quickly. I guess it passed with some gas, and then you have the descent off the opposite side, so that would be, I think that'd be like the south side of Sugarloaf Pass there, which is often known as the power line. People think of it as the power line climb or descent. Doesn't really matter. Depends which way you're going, out or back. On the way out, it's the power line descent, and that's because there's a big power line that you're running down next to. This is another really huge piece of advice for anyone who's running Leadville. When you hit that descent, especially if this is your first trail race, if you're one of those people, you read Born to Run, you're running Leadville as your first 100 miler or your first trail race, whatever, make sure that make sure that number one, you have a plan for how you're going to tackle downhills, both in training and in the race, but also make sure that you are doing eccentric loading exercises when you're in your training cycle, right? So the most common exercise of that kind of those kind of exercises I think would be like eccentric calf lowers, where you are lengthening the calf muscle and putting weight and stress on it, right? But you can do that for exercises like that for your calves, your shins, your hips, your quads, your hamstrings. So it's really important to make sure that you have durable muscles to be able to run downhill. And obviously the faster you go, the more stress you're going to be putting onto those joints and those muscles. And early on in a race, it's really important to have a plan for like, how are you going to tackle that kind of a descent, right? Because sure, you might be really quick on that first downhill, but if at the end of the day, bombing down that downhill only saves you 3 minutes, as opposed to maybe having, let's say you're like 3 or 5 minutes slower if you just take your time on it. Like, how much is that going to help or hurt you when you're, 50 miles later at mile like 75, right? So you got to think about like every footstep. How is that going to impact you 50 miles later when you're running these events? So just something to keep in mind. I would say that the trek, after you get down outward bound, you end up on a concrete road that takes you into outward bound there. I felt like I was behind my pace chart at that point, so I picked up the pace and I was running pretty quickly into Outward Bound. I based my pace chart off of other people who had run Leadville and my goals of running. I was trying to shoot for like the 22 to 24 hour time frame, and I don't know. There's the pace chart that Leadville has on their website. I don't personally think it's like the best one because, for example, at Outward Bound it said that I was like 15 minutes slow. So for reference, I got into Outward Bound in 3 hours and 59 minutes, which compared to their pace chart for 24 hours, it said I was 15 minutes slow. But then by the time I got to Twin Lakes, I know I'm fast forwarding a little bit, I got there in 6:29, which was like right on their, or actually it was like 10 minutes faster than their pace chart. And I don't really feel like I sped up a lot in that section. So, I would say like take other people's recommendations with a grain of salt and make a plan that works for you. So yeah, when I got into Outward Bound there at mile like 25 or 24-ish, I have it up here. Sorry. So Outward Bound, mile 23.3. My apologies. So mile 23.3, got there in 3:59. I was super, super stoked when I was there because I had like the best aid station transition of my life. I really geek out on this stuff if you can't tell. My good friend and pacer, Brian Steiner. For reference, Brian was actually on the Journey Running podcast. I forgot what episode number he was. Please do forgive me. But Brian is a 3-time leadman. At the time we recorded our podcast episode together, he was a 2-time leadman. So if you're looking for additional tips and tricks to prepare for the Leadville 100 and race it, I definitely recommend listening to that episode as well. But Brian was my crew and pacer for most of the race. He was actually my only friend who was at Outward Bound, and he did an amazing job with our transition. Like I said, this stuff really gets me hyped up. As I'm running into the Outward Bound aid station, Brian is taking pictures and filming me coming in, and then he puts his phone away and he starts jogging next to me, and he swaps out. We swap out my water bottles for like just a water bottle for a fresh one, and then I swapped out a Tailwind bottle I had for another bottle with Tailwind. At one point, I had like my empty bottle of maple syrup in my mouth while we're trading bottles, and he's like taking the bottle out of my mouth and giving me another one that's full, and we swapped like 3 bottles at once, and I gave him like a headlamp and my gloves by the time we were like at the aid station table. And once we got to the aid station table, I just picked up a few chips, M&Ms, and I was out of there in under 60 seconds. My stoppage time was probably under like 20 or 30 seconds. So I was very excited about that. And I think that if you want to do, your very best at these events, that it's important that you take the time to review your plan, your strategy. So that means your nutrition plan, but also how you're going to get in and out of aid stations quickly with your crew. Because the more time that you can reduce being stopped, obviously the faster your day is going to be. Let's see. So when you go out of Outward Bound, there's kind of like a minefield is what me and Brian over the years have talked about it. Like it's a minefield because there's a lot of really uneven steps and footing. So be careful in that like field there, both when you're leaving the aid station and when you're coming back in at mile like 80, right? Last thing you want to do is sprain an ankle that still early on into a race. And then after you get across that field, you end up on like a concrete road for a few miles. On that concrete road, I hit mile 25 in 4 hours and 10 minutes. I thought that was really fast. I mean, the thing is, most of the first, that first 38 miles of the Leadville 100 is like it's very, very quick. Just for reference, like that was the fastest first 25 miles I've ever done in a 100-mile race. Let's see, at Western States, just a month or 6 weeks prior to running Leadville in, I would say this year, but it's 2026 now, so in 2025, at Western States, I came through the mile 25 marker in 5 hours and 10 minutes. And skipping ahead, I ended up finishing Western States in 23 hours and 17 minutes, and I finished Leadville in 23 hours and 45 minutes. So I think that speaks a lot of volume just to the fact that, the first really the first 38 of Leadville is very quick compared to other courses, but I also think it speaks a lot to how difficult the section from Twin Lakes to Winfield, so over Hope Pass your first time, and then back to Twin Lakes over Hope Pass your second time, just how difficult that part really is, right? But we'll get to that point when we get there, right? Overall, the section, you're on like a concrete road for a few miles, and then you end up on like a dirt road, and a lot of it's like flat for a really, another like really long time. There's some like rolling hills, but the gradients are not crazy at all. It's really nothing crazy. It's just like make sure, I guess, in your training you're practicing on a few like rolling hills, but nothing is very steep in that section, up or down. I will say I think I did kind of a bad job hydrating on that section. I think that because I was so focused 6 weeks prior to Leadville on the heat of Western states, and I live in Colorado, I don't really take the altitude as it's not like a serious threat to me or my performance, but I think I did kind of a bad job underestimating just my hydration requirements that day. I think maybe I was just like tired of forcing myself to consume fluids when I didn't want to while racing last summer. Let's see, I just chatted with a few other runners on that section. I met a guy who was wearing jeans running a 100-miler. That was kind of crazy. Did not have that on my bingo card. He passed me. I later would learn that he, I think, was like Cam Haynes' son. His name's Truitt, I think. By the way, he was the only person who passed me going up Hope Pass, so I was totally fine losing to a guy who was wearing jeans. He seemed like a pretty cool guy when we were briefly chatting for a few miles on the way to Twin Lakes, though. But yeah, on the way to Twin Lakes, you also pass another aid station. It's called Half Pipe. For just time reference, I was there in 4 hours and 54 minutes, and yeah, probably didn't drink enough. I think I did not fill my bottles from the time I left Outward Bound to Twin Lakes. So that means I had like 1 liter of fluid over the course of that 12 miles, which probably took about like 2 hours-ish. So drink more than me is definitely recommended. But yeah, Leadville, they recommend that you get to Twin Lakes in 6 hours and 37 minutes. And when I got there, once again, my trusty steed, Brian, was there. Super great to see him. One of the things that I did at Leadville was I started the race with a waist belt, and I transitioned to a pack at Twin Lakes that first time. So what I did with Brian was I gave him, I basically was just trading bottles out with him the whole time. That way I didn't have to like stop at aid stations where there was crew to, do the bottles on my own. I just had him like using my Tailwind packets because I don't like using the electrolytes at events. I like being in control of how much of water to electrolyte like that ratio is on my own. So I guess I don't know, I'm just kind of OCD about that. Who would have thought? I'm a coach and I care about the specificities of the sport. But yeah, it was great. Brian did an amazing job really preparing everything the way that we had talked about the day before the race. I made like a whole crew presentation and reviewed that with him and some of my other friends who ended up showing up later in the event. But yeah, so I got to Twin. I ate a few chips, watermelon, M&Ms, stuff like that at the aid station. It's kind of a hectic environment at Twin Lakes, so make sure that you have some sort of strategy and know, like where your crew is going to be. The last thing you want to do is get to a big important aid station like that and not be able to find your crew, right? But I found Brian pretty easily. I know these days that Leadville has the lottery system for like who can set up a tent. They also drastically reduced the tent space. So in years prior, there's like that town of Twin Lakes where there's like a road you're like running through as a runner, and there's like a bunch of houses and stuff around, right? And then you cross a road, and then you're kind of like you're entering the single track, and there used to be tents and chairs and people set up on like the opposite side of the road too, like when you're going out towards Hope Pass. But now they have eliminated that whole area as like crewing. So basically there's like 50% less space, right? So they're trying to cram a lot of people into a small area. It probably had to do something with like the USFS, so the Forest Service, if I had to take a guess. But yeah, just make sure that I'm just trying to say that like it's really crowded and it's cool because like the crowd is super eccentric there, but you do want to make sure that like you have a plan in place to find your crew there. But anyways, yeah, I basically just put on a pack, picked up some poles, dropped off like some empty bottles, and I was on my way. So it was another aid station for me where I was probably only stopped for a total of like maybe 2 minutes max. So yeah, that's just like the power of planning. Like make sure you're on top of this shit. Like be organized. Don't expect your crew to do it for you. If you are the runner and your crew makes a mistake, that's your fault. You have to make sure that you have adequately prepared them. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I am missing there. I think I said I picked up some poles I had my poles in like the back of my pack when I picked up my pack. And so, yeah, I don't really think you need poles. If anyone has the question of like, am I going to run the whole Leadville 100 with poles or not? A few years ago, if you asked me that question, I would have said like, if you're going to use poles, then use them for the whole race. And if you're not, then don't use them at all. But I think my opinion has changed on that over time, and I would say like for a race like Leadville where the first 38 is so flat, like pick up poles at mile 38 before Hope Pass. Use them for Hope Pass minimum, but I think picking them up at 38 and finishing with them is worth it. So that's what I did. If you're trying to answer that question for yourself, and I thought that was a very good strategy for me. I think that if you practice with your poles, and that's another key thing that you need to do. If you're going to use poles, you got to make sure you're practicing with them. Poles are funny because they're like, it just looks so like obvious and innate to use. It's like riding a bike. It's like, oh yeah, like if you just buy them, you'll know how to use them. Like you'll naturally do it. But in reality, like if you buy them and you keep practicing with them, you will just naturally become more efficient with them. And when I say be more efficient, I mean you get better at putting more of your weight into your arm muscles and into your poles than into your legs. And the better you get at that, the more you can save the energy in your legs as a 100-mile race progresses, which is super important, right? So yeah, Hope Pass. I was fucking stoked to be going up Hope Pass during the Leadville 100 when I finally ran it, because I have lived in Colorado since 2017. I read Born to Run when I was like 14, maybe 15 years old, and I ran this race at 30 years old. I had just been waiting for so long to finally run the section during the race. I had done it before while hiking on the Colorado Trail and while pacing Leadville in the past. Disclaimer, in years prior, so 2019 was the last year that you could have a pacer at Winfield and go over Hope Pass with a pacer. I did pace that year, so that's what I mean by like I was able to pace the section, but you can't do that anymore. I guess I'm getting old. But anyways, I started out way too hot. I definitely did that first climb way too fast. I think I was just too excited and maybe frustrated that like it had taken me so long to get into Leadville to finally do it. And I passed a lot of people on the climb up, and on one hand, that's great. I was making great time, but I expended too much energy. I should have had the veteran knowledge to pace myself a little bit better and save some of that energy for the second climb up Hope Pass, because I did end up, I just ended up with lackluster energy on my second time up, 20 miles later. So that was tough. If I run Leadville again, or I should say when I run Leadville again, I'm definitely going to take that first climb a little bit easier in the future. But I thought it was funny that Truett was the only person who passed me, and of course he was wearing jeans. And in that moment I said to myself, I am okay losing to a guy wearing jeans. But yeah, I got to the top of Hope Pass in 8 hours and 25 minutes. In that last little section, there is like an aid station like not too far from the top of the pass. It's a little bit below the pass. They have water, food. They don't have like an excessive amount of things, but and they like will not, no matter how hot it is, they like won't use their water to like dump it on your head if it's really hot out. I ended up with like a pretty cool year at Leadville. Most years it is fairly warm there. I think that's something that most people don't prepare for because they're so focused on the fact that that the race takes place at 10,000 plus feet. They're so focused on the heat that they don't really, or sorry, they're so focused on the altitude they don't think about the heat. And I think that's important to remember because heat training for a race like Leadville is actually a really great way to prepare because heat training has a lot of the same effects as like altitude acclimatization. So it's kind of like a double whammy. If you want to prepare for the heat and the altitude of Leadville, hopping in the sauna for like 2 weeks before the race is a really great way to I would say assist your taper too, because you're running less miles, you'll have more time. Hop in the sauna with that time. But another thing to note, like with that aid station, is because they don't give out like a lot of water. There are a lot of creeks and streams you pass by on the way up Hope Pass, on both sides. And I would definitely recommend dunking your head into, some of those flowing rivers or streams while you're on your way up, or at the very least, like using your buff like a sponge. So take your buff, dump it into the water, squeeze it over your head, cool yourself off, man. Like it gets hot out there. So just another pro tip, I think. But yeah, there's the aid station, and then you go right up the pass. My year was cool. I got really lucky with the weather. There were no storms. Colorado is famous for monsoon season in the July-August time frame. So, after 2 o'clock usually, but that doesn't mean they can't come in earlier. You got to be really careful of like the storms. Being on a mountain pass is safer than being on top of a mountain because you're not the highest point, but it is still a little intimidating. It was hailing very lightly when I got up Hope Pass both times actually, but super lightly. It was like I got to the top and I thought something was going to roll in and it never did. And in between like that last aid station and the top of the pass, I was thinking to myself, I got to get up here before David Roach does for a second time. And I'd like just barely beat him. I saw him maybe like 3 switchbacks below the summit. So, and he was running every single step. So props to that man. Life's not fair. I think no matter how hard I train, I'll never be able to do that, but that's okay. Congrats, David. That was just a hell of a performance running the course record for the second time he's done it in, I forgot his finish time. It was like low 15 hours, 15:20, something like that. Just incredible. Yeah, this might be a good time while we're talking about Hope Pass just to talk about altitude and acclimating to that in your training and preparation for the race. So a lot of people, I think, have a confused understanding of what altitude really is. People think that there is less oxygen at 10,000 feet or 5,000 feet than there is at sea level, but that's actually not true. That's very misunderstood. There's actually the same amount of oxygen at sea level and 10,000 feet, for example. The difference is air pressure. So think of altitude like you think of the ocean, right? There are the same amount of water molecules on the top of the ocean as there are on the bottom. The difference is that there is a lot more pressure on the water molecules that are on the bottom. And so the further up you go, the less pressure there is. That's essentially like holding those molecules together. And so because of that, you end up taking in less oxygen when you breathe. And because of that, you end up with like less oxygen that's going to your muscles. I think that's like a pretty simple way to basically describe how altitude works. Most of those methods to acclimate to altitude, like those dumb, I'm going to say, you might listen to this and hate me, but like those dumb altitude masks that tell you that they're going to help you adapt to the altitude they're a waste of your money and you look stupid. They don't actually help. And the reason they don't help is because they don't actually do a good job at like helping mimic what air pressure is. They just reduce the oxygen flow that is going into your lungs, essentially. That's not the same as, like, if you actually want to adapt to altitude, you need to put yourself in like a hyperbaric chamber, something like that is actually going to reduce the air pressure around you. The other asterisk that's put next to that is like you need to be in there for like an extensive period of your day, something like 16 hours a day, which most people can't do if you're a normal person with a job and you need to. That's why people sleep in there, right? But the fact of the matter is, like, most of like the gimmicks that are sold are not actually helpful. Sorry, not sorry. If you actually want to adapt to the altitude, you're going to have to put in some work, like going to a sauna and spending, 30 probably-ish minutes in there per day for like 2 weeks leading up to the race, which is time-consuming and takes effort. But that's probably your best way of getting ready for a high-altitude race if you live at sea level. Anyways, I thought that would be a good informational tangent for anyone who's listening. The way down Hope Pass, when you are going, it'd be south towards Winfield, it's pretty steep for that first, I believe it's about 2 miles down to there's a junction where you take like a sharp right while you're on your way down. It's like 2 miles from like the summit up to that junction. I can't remember where I thought I wrote it down, what that junction was called, but anyways, I apologize. It is about 2 miles and it's pretty steep. It can be kind of rocky. Make sure that you're prepared. Like I said earlier in this podcast episode, make sure you've done some eccentric exercises leading up in your preparation as well as practice downhill running. If you are like new to running ultras and this is your first 100, don't think about running just the 14,000 feet of vertical gain. Make sure that you're also focused on that 14,000 feet of descent, because that's really what's going to kill you if you're not prepared for it. A mix of like downhill running on, I would say, a variety of grades and doing eccentric exercises is a great way to prepare. By the way, we'll take a quick side note from the Leadville 100 race report, and I would just like to say I've paced this race 4 times, run it once myself. I think I'm a pretty dang good coach for this event. If you would like more tips, tricks, nutrition knowledge, and a training plan from somebody who has paced it 4 times and run it in 23 hours and 45 minutes, I think I'm a great coach for you if you're enjoying this podcast so far and you're enjoying all the side tangents that I go on. But let's see. Yeah, the way down is pretty steep, rocky, technical, like I was saying, for that first 2 miles. Oh, how could I forget? Don't forget to take in the view while you're on your way down. You get a great view of a lot of the Sawatch Range, Colorado 14ers while you're there. The one in front of you, that's most directly in front of you, is called La Plata, and La Plata Peak, that's like just over, I forgot what the actual feet on it is. It's over 14,000 feet though. And you can also, I'm pretty sure from Hope Pass off the top of my head, you can see the 3 Apostles, which are that might be on the other side of Huron. I'm not sure if you can see it actually. Anyways, there's a lot of great mountains and views over there. Yeah, so make sure you take that in. Get a selfie. Like, ask somebody to take another participant to take a photo of you, and then take a photo of them. Like, I know that we talk about aid station efficiency a lot, and we talk about doing everything we can to be the best athlete we can, but, like, what's the point of it all if we're not enjoying the moment, right? So, yeah, once you get down that steep section, you will end up basically on you are on the Colorado Trail the whole time there, and you have to like basically do a U, like a giant U, and like wrap around to the Winfield trailhead. And so that's really important. This is a really important stretch of the race, because if you haven't been able to practice or see this section of the course on paper, it looks really easy. You kind of just think to yourself, once you're on top of Hope Pass that first time, it's all downhill to Winfield, but that's not really true. After that like first steep 2 miles, you actually end up on like a pretty rolling section that it feels like it goes back uphill again. If you actually look at the elevation chart of the race, you'll actually see that you go down and then you go up to get into the Winfield aid station. So there is quite a bit of just annoying uphill that you have to do there, and you're going to want to be prepared for that, because mentally it's a gut punch if you're not expecting something really hard to occur in your life, and it does. So I'm giving you that warning now. Like, be prepared, because that section over there, it's later in the day. There's a good chance you're hitting the Winfield aid station at about like 10 hours into the race, would be 2 o'clock in the afternoon, right? So if you're getting there in like 10 to say 15 hours, then that means it's 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock. So it's pretty warm, right? So and a lot of that trail is very exposed, so you want to make sure you're ready for a gut punch that's just an annoying uphill grade in the dry heat. So just mentally prepare for that. And then once you finish that section of the Colorado Trail, you do take like a left onto a dirt road, and then you basically run that into the Winfield aid station. And that part is downhill. It is downhill. But yeah, once I got to the Winfield aid station there, I basically just did my best to. One of the volunteers had ice, and I was so thankful of that somebody had taken the time and effort to bring out ice to that important aid station. It did get kind of hot for like maybe an hour or so while I was in like that general Winfield area, and so it really helped to be able to put ice in my buff, around my neck, and in my like hat that I was wearing, and in my arm sleeves. Just cooling myself off for a period of time was very, very helpful, and I highly recommend doing that. Thermoregulation, so making sure your body is at an adequate body temperature, is so important when you're running ultras, because if you can't cool yourself off, then it becomes really hard for your body to do other things like digest nutrients, and you can't run 100 miles if your gut's not working, right? So staying cool it's very important for multiple reasons. The other thing I did there was load up on a bunch of calories. I had a few cups of like soda. I think I had some ramen while I was there. I had some chips. I had some M&Ms. And of course, I had my trusty maple syrup with me. I did not personally use a drop bag. I can't remember. I think you can use a drop bag at Winfield. Pretty sure you can. I didn't use a drop bag there. I just took some extra maple syrup with me, of course. And I put that in had that in my waist belt. I still had my waist belt with me. I had a waist belt and a pack for that section, actually, just to be able to carry some extra stuff. I would say that most runners, so this is actually super important to think about because it's kind of hot in the day, that climb up Hope Pass the second time, it's going to take longer than the first one, partially because there's, how do I put it? It's your second time going up. I think that's just the easiest way to say it, but also because it tends to get pretty hot on that area of the course. And because of that, you want to think about how much water are you going to take from the Winfield aid station up and over Hope Pass your second time, because you're going to need, there's not like an aid station like there is on your way out from Twin Lakes. Like when you're going out from Twin Lakes, you hit that aid station like 5 miles up-ish. I think it's give or take. It's like 5 miles up the pass there. Let me see. I could get you specific numbers actually. Okay, yeah. So Twin Lakes is at mile 38 and then 37.9, and then Hope Pass, the aid station's 43.1. So you hit an aid station 5 miles later. And then Winfield, though, Winfield's mile, I'm just looking on the Leadville website, they have it as mile 49.8, and Hope Pass, to get back to that aid station, is mile 56.7. So that's closer to 7 miles, right, that you're going without a water refill. So that's really important because the miles going up Hope Pass are slow, and you want to make sure you have enough water with you. It's going to take a lot of people more than 2 hours to do that section. So if you only have like 2 front water bottles in your pack with you, is that going to be enough? For me, it was hot out for maybe 45 minutes after I left, 45 minutes after I left Winfield. So it wasn't, I didn't get a super hot day, so I got lucky. But also, I personally am a fan of, I think that there's times and places to not filter your water, and I was not afraid of like just grabbing stream water on the way up. That's kind of like a personal decision that you have to make before you run a mountain race. Like, do you want to make sure you run with a filter, or do you want to, the easiest thing you can do is just like carry an extra water bottle with you, or you could have a bladder in your pack and 2 upfront water bottles, right? Because then you could carry, 2 full liters with you out of Winfield, or you could carry even 3. I'm sure somebody's done that section with 3 full liters. That's a lot of weight to carry. I personally am a fan. I'm more of the fan of just like carrying 2 bottles, and if I run out of water, just like grab stream water. I think that because while you're going up Hope Pass, you're hitting 12,000 feet on the pass even while you're climbing up, you're like 10,000, 11,000 feet. The water up there is pretty clean. The higher you go, the less chance there are of like seeing big animals, and big animals when they poop is what like causes giardia if that gets into the water. But there's like a very low chance of like that, of you getting sick from stream water. And even if you do get sick, it won't happen until after the race, so don't worry about it. But my point is like that's a personal decision. Do you want to carry your options are basically, you have three options. Like, do you want to carry more water bottles to have more capacity to carry water from the aid station? Do you want to carry a filter to filter stream water? Or do you just want to grab stream water and not filter it? So just something to think about. Also, I don't think I said what time I got into Winfield. I got in there in 9 hours and 50 minutes, just for reference. But yeah, and then I would say that I would actually go as far as saying that like those first few miles out of Winfield to the point where you hit, like I was talking about the 2 really steep miles that you have to descend to the Winfield trailhead. So you have like 4-ish miles basically when you're going out of Winfield to get to what would now be a 2-mile very steep climb. I actually thought that those 4 miles were easier to do on the way out than they were on the way in. So, on one hand, it's kind of a gut punch on the way in when you feel like you're so close to the aid station because you've already summited Hope Pass your first time, but you still have some work to do. But it is nice when you leave the aid station, I think, too. You do have a little bit of climbing to do, but that rolling section on the Colorado Trail to get back to the really steep climb is, I would say, easier on the way out. That's just my opinion, though. Yeah, I had a lot of trouble generally on my climb up the second time. When it got steep, I did that like first mile pretty well, but my second mile up the pass, I really struggled. I think I just worked too hard that first time going up. Part of me wants to say like, well, maybe it was bonking. I don't think it was bonking. Like I was actually still doing a really good job taking in carbohydrate, maple syrup, Tailwind, eating at the aid station. I thought I ate a lot at the Winfield aid station. But I think I also did like kind of a poor job hydrating. Like I said, I only had like 1 liter from from Outward Bound to Twin Lakes. I only had like a liter on the way up to the Hope Pass aid station. I only had a liter on the way down. I probably should have, and I only had a liter on the whole way up from Winfield to the Hope Pass. I probably should have just drank some stream water, and I didn't even do that. That was my plan, but I didn't do it. And I think that I just did, I think that just poor hydration was my own fault. So, do a better job than I did, I guess is what I'm saying. But it's really important, I think, to be analytical when I'm doing like a race report like this, because this is entertainment, it's education for anyone who's listening, but it's also a good exercise for me as an athlete selfishly to review all of the mistakes that I made. And, the mistakes that I make at this point in my career are generally not, they're never like, what's the word I'm looking for? None of them are devastating. Knock on wood, I'll knock on my desk here. But yeah, none of the mistakes I've made are like race ending. And I mean, given my performance at Leadville, I think I did pretty well despite just like some minor mistakes, but it's these like minor mistakes where it's like, oh, what if you just had like another half liter of water here or half liter of water there with some extra electrolytes? Like maybe that would have made the difference of like how you felt. And maybe it wouldn't, but it's important to be analytical so that you can improve next time. Trying to think. The climb up Hope Pass the second time, like it just kind of sucks. You're going to be doing some like 25, 30-minute miles. They're like over or about like 1,000 feet per mile grade. So once again, just make sure you're practicing that in your training. Getting to the top the second time feels really good because then you know that you've done like most of the hard climbing for the entirety of the event. One of the issues that I had in the second half of my race was outside of, I definitely had some trouble going up the pass my second time, but I had some issues on my descent down back into Twin Lakes. I, like maybe a half mile from getting down the like total descent, of Hope Pass that second time, like the really steep stuff, I noticed that like my left knee was starting to bother me. And what I would later learn after the race, like a month later, because I was having some trouble with my recovery after the race, which is unusual for me. And I went to PT, and it turns out I had like kind of a weak, had an imbalance in my left quad that was it was more tight than like my right side essentially, and it was like pulling on my knee in a way that I didn't realize like it was an imbalance during Leadville. Keep in mind, I did a lot of racing in 2025, so like there's a good chance that my knee bothering me at Leadville was just like the compounding effect of like training for the year, running Western States 6 weeks prior, stuff like that. But yeah, I did have some issues, some knee issues on my way down, which was frustrating. As like the second half of the race progressed, my pacers would like take turns like rolling out my quad for me, my IT band area, just to so that like the pain would dissipate and go away, and that worked like pretty well. And what do you know? I go to PT like a month later, and I find out that that exact area that my pacers were rolling out was like the area that like that was causing some of my like knee pain. Keep in mind, like most pains that we experience, they're not like if you have plantar fasciitis, there's a good chance it's because like your calves or your Achilles is tight. Like it's not actually your foot that's the problem. If you have knee pain, it's probably not your actual knee that's the problem. It's probably like your hips are tight, or your quad is tight, or like a hamstring is stronger than the other, something like that. So that's what ended up happening to me. I can talk about this with a lot of the understanding of what happened after, since I'm recording this podcast a few months later. But yeah, running through Twin Lakes the second time was kind of cool. Unfortunately, I was like taking turns like walking and running. Oh, how could I forget? I don't even think I like really talked about the stream crossing before we get back into Twin Lakes the second time. The stream crossing is really not that bad. So the stream crossing on the way back in, a lot of people are prepared to change their shoes at Twin Lakes the second time, and I highly recommend doing that. But Colorado is so dry where like you really don't need to worry about your feet being wet for too long when you're on like your way out. And the stream only really goes up to, it was like the middle of my shins, I think, both times. So it probably depends on the year and the snow melt that you're running Leadville in terms of like how high the stream is there. But they have like a rope that you just follow and it guides you across the stream. It's really not too bad. But I know a lot of people are worried, especially if you have a history of getting blisters. A lot of people do worry about like how are their feet going to hold up as the race progresses, and just make sure that you are prepared to that you have a plan. Like if you are super prone to blisters, like maybe you do want to have an extra pair of socks that you change into after you cross the river that first time, because you still have to go over Hope Pass to Winfield and back. But the second time is a lot easier because you cross the stream and then like, a mile and a half later or whatever, you're back at Twin Lakes and you can change shoes with your crew. So yeah, the second time I got to Twin Lakes, I was very excited to be running through again. There's really just so few aid stations in the sport of trail running in the U.S., at least, that have aid stations that are as loud and crowded and eccentric as Twin Lakes. So I really tried my best to take it in. Some guy in a sumo suit was like running next to me, which was kind of funny. But yeah, for the most part, like I got into Twin Lakes, and it was the first time of the entire race. So at mile 62, that I was essentially trying to spend more time at an aid station than not. I just thought it was worth it because my knee had started bothering me like a mile earlier, and I wanted to make sure that like I got everything I needed there. And luckily, Brian, of course, he ended up meeting a physical therapist who, I think he was like a PT or sports doctor or something, and he kind of like rolled out my quad for me and did like a few, I don't know, sports doctor type exercises to just help loosen my leg up a little bit, which was helpful. And he was doing that while I was like sitting in a chair and eating some food and hydrating and kind of just talking to my crew about like how I was feeling. I did mean to say my time for, let's see, for this aid station. I'm looking at a Word doc, and I, of course, did not write it down. My apologies. I think it was something like 13 hours and 10 or 15 minutes. I think it was like 13 hours and 10 minutes off the top of my head that I got to Twin Lakes the second time. So, interestingly, it was a little bit faster than Western States still, but it's interesting because at Western States I got into the 100K marker also at like 13 hours and like 20, it was like 13:25 or 7 or something, 13:20, I don't know. The point is, like, both races ended up really evening out, and I just say that because I got a lot of questions from my friends after people like after the race were asking me, like, is Western or Leadville harder? And it's interesting when you look at how like the times ended up matching up, because like I said earlier, I started a whole hour faster at Leadville than I started at Western, but because of how difficult the middle section at Leadville is compared to, say, like the canyons at Western, like the canyons didn't slow me down as much as like going over Hope Pass twice did. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. Let's see, at Twin Lakes 2, though, I ended up picking up my roommate, Dave Bronlick. He's also been on this podcast. Trying to remember what episode he was. We probably talked a lot about through hiking because he's done like the Appalachian Trail. Last year he did the Continental Divide Trail. We should probably do an episode on that at some point. But so he was my first pacer before. So he paced me from Twin Lakes to Outward Bound before my friend Brian took me into the finish line. And, Dave and I, we moved pretty well. It's nice that, it worked well for me that my knee was bothering me a little bit on the way out of Twin Lakes. So the way out of Twin Lakes is uphill for the first, few miles. And it was nice to have an excuse to hike instead of run for a second. And, just focus on hydrating, eating some food, doing what I could to, running when I could. When I could on some of those ascents out of the aid station. But yeah, I would say ended up doing pretty well. I'd say after that first few miles out, it gets pretty flat and runnable again on your way back towards Outward Bound. I ran a lot of that section and somehow kept moving up in the results, just despite the fact that my knee was bothering me. It was super annoying. But yeah, despite having to stop, because I had to stop every basically 1 or 2 miles for Dave to roll out my my quad and the area on the side of my leg above my knee, just so that it was loose enough for my knee not to hurt, so I could run for another mile or two before it would start hurting again. Super frustrating. Just make sure that you do your physical therapy exercises before events. I didn't do the best job in my preparation leading up to Leadville. That is because I ran 6 weeks before. I've said this before, but 6 weeks before Leadville, I ran Western States. 5 weeks before, I crewed and paced at Badwater 135. And then 4 weeks before, so the week after Badwater, I was volunteering at High Lonesome overnight, which was really cool. But that was 3 weeks in a row where I didn't sleep on the weekends. And then, and obviously I'm working and coaching and having other life obligations. And then I had to get my last training in for Leadville, and then I moved apartments. So don't taper the way I tapered, because there was just too much on my plate, and that definitely hindered the, I would say, exercise and training regimen that I would normally follow leading up to a tough mountain 100. And some of my, I think that ended up resulting in some of the injury type pain that I had in the last third of Leadville, which was frustrating. But it is what it is. You look back in retrospect and you just try your best to do better next time. I'd say overall I was still moving on the slow sections 15-minute pace, and on the faster sections 11 to 13-minute pace. I started to feel kind of dizzy when I was rolling into half pipe. I think once again it just comes down to I didn't hydrate super well on a few sections of the course. I could have done better, and I think once again I was focused on my knees, so I wasn't super focused on my calorie and my hydration intake at that point. Or I should say calories I was doing pretty well, but hydration I think was where I was really lacking. Yeah, let's see. So fast forward a little bit. I ended up getting into Outward Bound just after dark. I think I only had to use a flashlight for like a mile on my way into Outward Bound. So we were moving really well. At Outward Bound, I was apparently in like 26th place out of 700 plus starters. My crew told me I was in 22nd at half pipe, and I didn't believe them. I thought that they were full of shit. I thought that they were just like trying to lie to me because my knee was bothering me. And the Outward Bound aid station gets really cold. It's by I think it's by like a creek or something. That usually when an area of a course or just in the wilderness is cold, it's because there's a water source nearby. And it just gets really cold there. So like I sat in a chair, I'm freezing my ass off. My knee was bothering me for a lot of that 15-mile section into Outward Bound, and I just like didn't believe my crew when they told me I was doing well. I was like, "Fuck you guys!" Like I'm just, I'm trying my best, like regardless of what place I'm in, and I'm gonna keep trying my best. But yeah, anyways, I sat down there for a minute. I had some ramen, some Coke. I picked up my waist belt light. I'm a huge fan of waist belt lights. I think that they do a great job, particularly Ultraspire. I love my 600 lumen light. I think it's incredible. I do think it's way better also, as a side note, than what's the other one? Kagala. I used to have a Kagala, but I thought that it was just too heavy of a battery pack to lug around, and it just wasn't designed very well for... I don't think the Kagala is designed very well because you have to like find a place to like put it. The Ultraspire light I love because it's 600 lumens is not as bright as the Kagala, but it's all you really need to be on a trail at night. And I don't even use it most of the time on the max setting. I use it at like the 400 lumen setting, and that does like the job really well. That plus a headlamp is a great combo. It's a lot lighter than the Kagala was, and it it comes with like a waist belt, so you don't have to like find a place to like put it on your waist or to like carry it with, which is nice. I also picked up some gloves there. I put on a long sleeve jacket there, which was a rain jacket. It did not rain on me. Just rain jackets, the way they're designed compared to like a windbreaker is that like they help you retain heat, which is why I like using that as like a jacket at night, because they do a good job helping you keep heat in as opposed to out. But yeah, so that was essentially what I did at Outward Bound. Once again, even though like my Twin Lakes aid stations and my Outward Bound aid stations were kind of long, I wasn't at either one for more than like probably no longer than like 10 minutes. Which is, to me, I still think that that's a lot of time that you're leaving on the table, but sometimes you just feel like shit and you stop caring. So, this is why you make a plan to be successful and you try your best to follow it, but you don't always follow it to a T. Those first few miles to Powerline, I would say that they were pretty easy on concrete. My knee actually stopped bothering me for quite a few miles, which was really nice and helpful. I moved really well on the concrete road there, and I ran like probably most of those few miles from the Outward Bound aid station to the bottom of the Powerline climb. And at that point, my friend Brian Steiner was pacing me. He did a great job. We power hiked really hard up Powerline, or like as hard as you can at mile like 78, right? What is that, like mile 78 to like 82 or something like that? Or sorry, it's let's see. So Outward Bound on the way in is mile 76. So yeah, it's like mile 79 to 83 about. And so yeah, I thought that we did like a pretty good job hiking up. We were going at about like 20 to 21 minute pace on the uphill, which is, I would say that's good that late in the race, but it's not great. I think that in the future I can do better, if I'm being honest. But it is what it is. It's just it's a tough climb to do when you're mile like 80 plus miles into an event. It's never easy. And you follow the power line up, and it was cool to be finally racing it myself. It's pretty quiet on the trail. I remember the first time I was on power line ever was with the roles were reversed, and I was actually pacing my friend Brian, and it was 2019, and Brian was fighting the cutoffs. He ended up finishing in like 29 hours and 45 minutes, so he like just barely made it that year, which was crazy. And, I was pacing Brian up power line, and there's like all these flashlights because a good chunk of the Leadville field finishes in that last like 2 hours. I forgot what the stat is. I think it's like over 50% of the field finish in like the last 2 hours. So like the 28 to 30 hour time frames. There's a lot of flashlights like going up the mountain past there, and you turn around and you like while you're climbing up and you see all these flashlights coming up, and there's usually like two flashlights next to each other representing a runner and their pacer, and it's just super inspiring to see each one of those bobbling headlamps representing a runner and their probably a really good friend of theirs chasing down a dream to finish a famous, historic, and difficult 100-mile mountain ultramarathon. So super inspiring, I think, when you're on that section. Unfortunately, it was kind of quiet while I was climbing up it. There were no headlamps, no other headlamps to take inspiration from. I guess, being at the front of the pack is like kind of cool, but also like I enjoy like turning around and seeing, the community pushing themselves forward. That always gets me going when I'm in a race and motivates me. But yeah, I hope I'm not spoiling. If you want to have a nice surprise while you're running the Leadville 100, skip forward about a minute. But if you don't really care, then you can listen to this. At mile 85, there is a surprise unofficial aid station. It is run by the Floyds of Leadville, a CBD shop. And they have like a whole party up there. Every year they have this big sign up there that says, "Welcome to Space Mountain, you fucking did it," something like that. And I don't know, it's always like super fun to see that group up there. They have like shots of Jim Beam that they serve. Every year they always have, Coke and water and extra food for runners. I'm sure that, I have definitely seen like a half-smoked bowl of weed sitting on the water cooler, so I'm sure they got a few other things if you'd like to imbibe yourself with over there. But yeah, they always know how to throw a great party. Sadly, I was feeling like shit by the time I got to the climb, so I kind of just like walked through their unofficial aid station, and I just like walked through the aid station, and Brian was like, "Bro, your finish doesn't count if you don't. The finish doesn't count if you don't take a shot." But I was like way too tired to care. Brian took a shot every time I think he was at that aid station in his 3 Leadville. So I guess Brian still has 3 finishes and I have 0. But jokes aside, I felt like ass after that. I don't know, like I think it was just like I had just talked about a moment ago, like my life leading up to Leadville in this last year was not ideal for, if you look on paper at my taper, it was still like a taper, but I just had so much other life stuff going on, like the stress of the cortisol levels and stress of like, being at Western, running the race, crewing, pacing Badwater. Once again, it was staying up all night, volunteering at High Lonesome, getting in my training for Leadville, like moving apartments 2 weeks before. I think that really got to me because I thought, even in retrospect, I've looked at all the math. If you can't tell, I'm super analytical and I care about every detail. That's why these race recap episodes I do are so dang long. But it's also because I love the sport. Like I love all the details. But I just like can't really put my finger on anything that is the reason that I felt so bad, other than just all those events that led up to my race this year. And I was like trying to hobble my way down Sugarloaf Pass the best I can, but I was trying my best to run, and I like could muster the energy to run a few steps, but after I would run a few steps, I just like couldn't get myself to run anymore. And I know like somebody's going to listen to this and be like, "What do you mean? Like it's always hard at mile like 85 of a race, 90 of a race. It's always hard." That's true. It is always hard. It is never easy. But I have done 14 of these now. Leadville was my 14th 100-mile race. And I've run 2 Moab 240s. So you could argue that Moab 240s or 200s count as 200 milers, right? I mean, I'm joking. I think that they just count. An event, regardless of its distance, counts as one, I think. But I've done this a lot of times. I know what it's like to be at mile 85, 90, 95. I know what it's like to be a mile 150, and this was like the worst I've ever felt. So it just like was not a great scenario. I think I was just like zapped from how I lived my life for that 6-week span, and I regret nothing. I would do it again the same exact way. They were all amazing experiences. Western States, of course, Badwater. It was so cool to crew. You can listen. I did a whole other episode on what it was like to crew Badwater. And yeah, of course, volunteering at High Lonesome. I was at an aid station that was at like 13,000 feet, and it was super cool to be up there all night. It was like EDM themed, and there were storms that were coming in, and it was a lot of fun to like help the runners achieve their dreams there that day. So I regret none of it, but I definitely paid the price at Leadville, and I pretty much walked like every mile after the summit of Powerline there to the finish line. Outside of maybe like a quarter mile here and there, just like yogging it in. When Brian and I finally did get to the May Queen aid station, it was, 20 hours and 19 minutes into the race. So, we both kind of thought that's when we left. It was 20 hours and 19 minutes, but so we probably got there like 20 hours and like 10 minutes ish. So we thought we had it in the bag. I thought I did. I was like, we got 3 hours and 40 minutes to get to the finish line. Like, we're going to go sub 24. This is the lock. But, I looked so bad at May Queen there. Like, the second I got to that aid station, and it's another really cold aid station, like I was saying before with Outward Bound, when you have an aid station that's next to a water source, it gets really cold because water temperature, that seeps into the air and cools the ambient temperature. So obviously, May Queen, right by Turquoise Lake, it gets really cold over there as well. And, the second I got to that aid station, my friends I had a few friends who were there at this point, and they threw like a blanket over me, refilled my bottles, got me some Coke, some ramen. I was trying my best to like take in calories and just get out of there. But, I would say like there's very few times in an ultra where in my whole life I've said to myself, like, I just don't really want to be here anymore. And I really did not. That was like one of them. I was so zapped and tired. I was like done. And so I ran out of that. I did run out of the aid station with Brian because I just needed to regain some body warmth. So I had to force myself to run to regain some of that back. But, the second we hit the single track trail of Turquoise Lake, it's single track again. So instead of running next to Brian was like, do you want to lead or not? And I was like, yeah, I want to set the pace. So I started setting the pace, and I kid you not, like I maybe walked like 10 feet and Brian looked at me and he was like, bro, there's no fucking way I'm letting you lead. Like, I'm setting the pace. And he just ran ahead of me, and he was like, we are going my pace, and you're going to hate me now. But you'll love me after this race is over when you have a sub 24-hour finish here. And truer words could not have been spoken. Brian would not let me set the pace. He ended up setting what ended up being like a 17-minute hiking pace. And gosh, dude, those were the hardest fucking 17-minute miles of my entire life. I felt like they were a punishment, not only for how I lived my life in the few weeks leading up to Leadville this year, but also just for like, I have paced this section of Leadville twice in the past, and I thought it was like my punishment for like, kicking other people's asses into gear, like at mile 90. So it was kind of funny, but like it was funny in like the worst way possible in the moment. I also just had like plenty of issues aside from just like feeling generally fatigued. My knee was still on and off bothering me. It felt like no matter how much I ate, I was still like bonking. And I also had some breathing issues at the end of the race. So this is somewhat common depending on the ultramarathon you're running. There's a lot of trails out here in the West that are very dusty. I know like the Tahoe area is super famous for this, in like desert races like in Moab, for example, that are super dusty. Like if you're breathing in trail dust for 24 hours during a race, it can get really hard to breathe. And I just started to find it very difficult, especially in those last 10 miles. It started to progress a lot. Like by the time I was at mile like 97, it was like becoming pretty hard for me to take like a full inhale of like air and feel like I was getting enough. And this was not altitude related. I know somebody might be listening and think that this is dust related. I know what altitude sickness feels like. I've lived in Colorado. I'm from New Jersey originally. I know what it's like to go from sea level to a 14,000 foot summit and experience what actually is altitude sickness. This was not that. This was just because of the dust. And so that also made it really hard to, do any sort of running. I really tried my best, but it felt like there was a dump truck that just put more rocks on the on the trail around Turquoise Lake, and I just kept kicking rocks and trying my best to hike as fast as I could. I looked at my watch every 0.1 miles to see what our progress was and do the math in my head in terms of how long it would take to finish. And, at the end of the day, the conclusion I came to was I just need to focus on the next step ahead of me. Sometimes all you can really do is ask yourself, can I keep moving at this pace for one more step? And, every time I asked myself that question in that 3.5 hours going into the finish line, the answer was yes. I might not be able to run. This might not be my strongest 100-mile finish, but the answer was always yes. I can take one more step and keep up this pace. And that's basically just what kept me going. Just one step at a time. To be a great ultramarathon runner, and even if you're having a bad day, to finish in a way that will still allow you to achieve your goals. Because I still finished in 23:45, which is I think pretty good. Even when it's not pretty though, if you can just do your best to compartmentalize the race in one section, 1 mile, one step at a time, you can be very successful in this sport. But yeah, it was a pretty brutal ending. Cold, my knee was bothering me. Literally, I tried to run it in the last half mile, and I couldn't. My knee was just bothering me too much at that point. So I waited until I was at that famous red carpet Leadville has, and I finally ran the last 100 meters in with Brian, and it was epic. I really appreciate him. Sometimes you need to have a pacer who's not going to listen to what you want, but who is going to be assertive and make choices that you will look back on fondly months and years later. Because, what Brian said out there, like I said before, he told me that you'll hate me now, but you'll love me forever. And he was totally right. I really appreciated that. Sometimes I would say as an experienced ultra runner at this point with 1400s under my belt, I feel sometimes it's easy to feel like you know everything, and when you tell your pacer, I don't want to do it this way, or I don't want you to set the pace, you feel confident in your decisions. But this was one of those times where I had to just let him be assertive as a friend and as a pacer and lead the way. And I really appreciate Brian for having the self-awareness to realize that I wasn't going to achieve my goals if I kept doing things my way in that section. So love you, Brian. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you. I guess there's kind of a lot of takeaways from this one. And I've got some Q&A. I'm going to answer just some common questions my friends asked me after the race. So let's get to that now, because it's been a long episode, and I'm sure that you guys want me to wrap this up. Gotta get a drink of water. My gosh. I've been talking for an hour and a half straight. All right, takeaways. So I think that one of my takeaways going forward is that my fueling plan is generally, I really liked what I did at both Western States and Leadville this year, focusing on simple sugars, which your body will burn much more easily in very hot races like Western and at altitude like at Leadville. So I think that my fueling plan for most of the race was really good. But one thing I started to think about was this whole high carb movement that's being pushed by elite athletes and for elite athletes. There's a big difference in an elite athlete who's running Western States or Leadville in the 14 to 16 hour range, consuming simple carbs for the entirety of their race, versus me, who's finishing in 24 hours. 23, 24 hours. That extra 7-8 hours or more for many people, right, who finish in 28, 29, 30 hours, that's a significant amount of time to still be just consuming simple sugars, right? So I think that One of the things that I'm going to be doing going forward is changing my end of race nutrition strategy. I think in the last 20 to 25 miles of hundreds going forward that I'm trying to be really competitive at, I'm going to start adding in more starchier foods. My first thought is that I might start experimenting with, like obviously I have ramen at night, but I think I'm going to start experimenting with like mashed potatoes or like instant mashed potatoes, something like that, just because it's a little bit more dense, and like starchy food breaks down a little bit slower in your gut. I just felt like the simple sugars at the end of both Western and Leadville were not really giving me as much energy as they did for like the first 100K. So I just think that when you're out there for 20 to 30 hours, you need to start eating some different foods. I don't really have science to back that up. It's just a personal something that I've noticed, so that might benefit somebody who's listening though. Another takeaway is, just on the pacer. I know I just talked about this, but a holistic takeaway is that, without Brian, I wouldn't have gone sub 24. Whereas, like at Western States, I do think I would have gone sub 24. I love my pacer. I love you, Joel. He was a great pacer at Western, but I think that like at Western, I just had like it was my A race of the year, and it did help that I didn't run 100 milers 6 weeks before Western like I did Leadville, but. I think that like at Western I could have run sub 24 without a pacer, whereas at Leadville I don't think I would have gone sub 24 without a pacer. And there is a time and a place for your friends to be like very assertive and make decisions for you and when to do it, and that's very nuanced. I think that a great takeaway though is like you need to base your pacers, like pick your pacers based off of like their strengths as people. Like I think Joel was a great person to have for Western, because I knew one of the reasons I chose him was because I knew that he would be very flexible of like, if the race isn't going the way we wanted to, like Joel's a really fun and optimistic guy. And I knew that he would be able to like change the goals that we had like in the moment very quickly and still be like a great friend and person to have out there with me. Brian, on the other hand, is a little bit more of like a hard ass. He's not going to take shit. And, when I was really struggling, like he was a good person to have in that like last section of the race. I really don't think that some of my other friends, if they were in that situation with me in that last section of Leadville, would have pushed me the way that he did. So I'm very grateful and lucky that he came out to pace from Oklahoma for this. A lot of wisdom and firm decision-making from him in the moment. Another question I got quite a few times was, which is harder, Western States or the Leadville 100? So I'm going to say that it's kind of a complicated answer. I don't think there's like a right answer. So when you say which is harder as like an entire course, I think that the entire course of Western States was harder, because the canyons are difficult. You start with like a 2,000 plus foot climb just off the bat, right? So like, and then the Granite Chief Wilderness is technical. And then the race isn't like too bad until you're in the canyons, but it is like 110 degrees. You have to be really good at running in the heat. You need to be, you are still at like elevation on certain parts of the course. It is really dusty out there. You need to have your nutrition and your electrolytes dialed in. There's a lot of sections you need to be able to run fast at. You need to be gritty at the end of Western. I don't know. It's just I think Western is such a cool race because you have to be a very versatile athlete. Whereas like Leadville is more acutely hard. And what I mean by that is like the first 38 miles of Leadville are so quick compared to like other hundreds I've done. I mean, the first 38 miles is probably the easiest first 38 miles of 100 I've ever done. But the section from like Twin Lakes to Winfield and back, so that 25-mile section is one of the hardest sections that I've done in like 100-miler, right? So that 25 miles is very difficult and very slow. And then I think the last 38 miles of Leadville are still somewhat hard because you still have like the hike up to, or run. I think most people are hiking it up Powerline. But for the most part, like, that 38 miles back is also not super hard. I just had struggles for different reasons that are not attributed to the course, I think. So I would say that Western as like a complete course is harder, whereas like Leadville is harder. Just for me, like that 25 miles from Twin to Winfield and back was harder than like the canyons were. But somebody else who's run both of these races is probably going to disagree and say like the canyons were harder for them than going over Hope Pass was. I would have been surprised by my own answer, I think, a year ago. I would have expected the canyons to be harder than Hope Pass before like running both of these races. Let's see. Also, just like a few thoughts on, the Leadville 100, like, and how they run the race with like the lottery. I do have kind of a lot of thoughts on that. If you really want to hear that, you can go to one of the earlier episodes I've done on like, I forgot what it was called. It was just like ultra lotteries, I think. I think I recorded that. Yeah, I recorded that with my friend Dave, who paced me at Leadville. So you can hear us talk about like interesting, ideas and changes that we would like to see in, a variety of ultramarathon lotteries, including Leadville. But one of the cool things about Leadville, I do think, is that although it is very difficult to get into the race, as I record this, January 2026, I'm now 0-4. So I got into Leadville this year in 2025 and just ran it because a good friend of mine, it was actually Brian, his girlfriend donated volunteer hours to me. And because of that, that's how I got into the 100 miler in 2025. But aside from like those volunteer hours being donated to me, I am now 0-6 in the lottery without, volunteer hours. So it is like very difficult to get into. With that said, it is cool that there are a lot of different ways to get in. Obviously they allocate spots to like elite athletes, and they do give coins out to age group winners at their like lifetime series events. They do have like sponsors. I'm sure they give some entries to like corporations or brands that sponsor the race, but they also have like charity slots. If you really want to get in, you could run the Leadman, be a Leadman contestant, which I know is a big what's the word I'm looking for? It's just a big commitment. But, you could do that. You could also be a lifetime gym member and get in that way. I know they let influencers in. That's the one thing that kind of annoys me. Sorry, not sorry. But yeah, they also let in everyone who lives in Leadville, is my understanding also. So there's a lot of different ways to get in. If you really want to get in, like, you could probably do so quickly if you want to, like, run for, like, a charity or, work your way into the race by doing, by qualifying with like a coin at one of their other events. Personally, I would love to see some like transparency with how their lotteries run, but I've been saying that for years, along with many other people, so we're probably not going to get that. It's okay. You can choose to love something even if you don't like everything about it. But yeah, I do think that'd go a long way with the general population of the sport. And the last thing, I just want to reiterate how to prepare for altitude. That's another common question I get as like a coach. So, the number one thing, and I said this already in this podcast episode, is heat training. The race at Leadville is often pretty hot, but also you need to prepare for altitude. Obviously, I talked about the science of how that works. A lot of the benefits that you get from heat training protocols, like going to the sauna for like 2 weeks leading up to a race, are going to benefit you for altitude. For example, if you put time and effort into your heat training, your body's going to do a better job at producing more hemoglobin and producing more blood volume, so extracellular blood volume. Your body uses that for sweat, which can help you mitigate heat, but that can also, help with because you lose hydration status more easily at altitude, and just like having greater blood plasma volume and hemoglobin also helps you transport oxygen better to your muscles. Of course, if you live at altitude, just like climb up mountains to train, and that'll get you acclimated to. Like if you live in Colorado, there's no reason why you shouldn't be, number one, going to Hope Pass to train for this race. It's so hard to get into Leadville. You got to take advantage of actually being in it. But yeah, the other thing is just like getting up to 14,000 feet on 14ers in, May, June, July. May is kind of tricky. Sometimes it's too snowy up there in May, but in June and July leading up to the race, like you should be training on 14ers if you live in Colorado out here. All right. Well, that was a long episode again. My friend Dave, he sent me the "Ya Boy Scott Jurek" meme, about like race reports being way too long, and he tagged me in that. I thought that was funny. If you look at my Substack articles, all my race reports are way too long. But like I said earlier, some of the stuff is selfish. I like being analytical and reviewing this stuff for me, but it is also for everyone who's listening. And, I've tried very hard in this episode and many others to throw in my life lessons and wisdom and sports science into these episodes to help people prepare for events, hopefully more than adequately. So, yeah. With that said, I'm going to say it again. I have paced the Leadville 100 4 times. I have now run it once. I have run 13 other 100 milers, including 200 milers, plus Leadville, so 14 total. I like to think I'm a pretty good coach. I'm also a registered dietitian. So, if you are looking for, a coach, a registered dietitian, somebody with practical ultra running experience to help you train and prepare for the Leadville 100, please do reach out to me. I can be reached directly at my email, which is journeyrunningsllc@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me on my website and learn more about my coaching platform, Journey Running, at journeyruncoaching.com. Thank you all so much again for taking the time to listen to today's episode. If you wouldn't mind taking just a brief moment of your time to give us a 5 stars, leave a rating, a review, I would really appreciate that. But at the end of the day, really appreciate you listening. I hope you were able to come away with valuable information that can help you run farther, feel smarter, and develop character through trail and ultra running. And I hope that you have a great rest of your day. Happy training.